Hey everyone, it's Jazzy Marie and welcome back to the channel. With Season 7 of the wonderfully weird world of Gumball, formerly the amazing world of Gumball, releasing on Hulu in the US on the 28th of this month, I figured episode 4 of Plural Rep could shed some light on the show's probably accidental representation before the new season's air date. You may notice that there's a missing episode in the vid list, and that's because episode 3, hosted by Annie, isn't available to the public yet. There's a copyright issue that has to be sorted out, and honestly, we may not be able to do the video clip format with Disney Media because of YouTube's bots, which is fine. But we didn't want issues with episode 3 interfering with this latest one, so I've decided to release this one before episode 3. We're not changing the numbered order either. We want it glaringly obvious that after so many days of editing and gathering clips, episode 3 was never released on its intended date thanks to fair use in the case of YouTube bot scouting not being very fair. But anyway, back to Gumball. For those of you who need a reminder or a straight up introduction, this animated series was created in 2011 by Ben Buckley for Cartoon Network. Its titular protagonist Gumball Watterson is a 12-year-old anthropomorphic blue cat with a penchant for mischief. Most of the series focuses on him and his pet-turned-brother Darwin as they get into all sorts of antics that, according to Season 7's descriptions, are even crazier than those of the previous 6 seasons. In a show that has anything and everything chaotic, I feel like we were bound to run into a lot of rep for different groups that are commonly overlooked, including Plural folk, and we'll be exploring 3 episodes from the show's first 3 seasons, 1 episode for each, that portray plurality in some interesting ways. I can't start yapping about Plural Rep though without a recap on what plurality is. I usually roll with the multiple self-aware, sentient, sapient agents sharing a body definition, which includes both multiple people cases and dissociated parts of one person cases. However, a broader definition introduced to us by Bloodmoon, the state of being/having anything other than one cohesive, consistent, constant, uninterrupted identity, encompasses the previous definition and to me does a better job of emphasizing that plurality at its core is identity or selfhood based, not behavior or personality based. While behavior, personality, emotions, and interests can absolutely be relevant with plurality, since many of those things can be different across plurans, those things aren't determiners. A singlet can have a very diverse personality, behavioral set, emotional range, or any other mental element, and still be a singlet if there is only one sense of selfhood, only one identity present, theirs. By focusing on identity as a foundation, the definition also reinforces the point that plurality isn't based on externally observable stuff. Identity and selfhood are pretty much internal things that those who are experiencing them can choose to be open about with others. That means that there are generally no explicit telltale signs of plurality that people can observe in others and go, they're definitely plural! And there aren't any signs of faking it either. Big, heavy air quotes. I also like this definition because it focuses less on a body in its wording. The sharing a body part of the definition that I use is fine and all, but there are many of those within our collective, specifically who don't even use the body we have in this outer world at all, and some wouldn't consider themselves sharing it either. Nonetheless, they're still present. They're still there and can use this body at any point if they wish, if its fronting wave is intact anyway. Bloodmoon's definition focuses on presence. In this case, the presence of anything other than one, which works great because plurality is a state of existence, and more than one is quite often regarded as its brief meaning. Alright, with the gushing over of definitions out of the way, back to Gumball. The first instance lies in Season 1, Episode 12, The Ghost, which portrays spiritual plurality pretty plainly. Pay attention to the spiritual part specifically, because that'll pop up more than once in this video. Gumball reluctantly lets his friend and classmate, and later Darwin's girlfriend Carrie Kruger, a ghost, borrow his body for eating. So definitely a plural case alone, considering both definitions. However, Gumball doesn't seem to have much or any awareness of the outer world while Carrie's using his body, with the only exception being a point in the episode at which Carrie and Gumball both have some degree of control over his body while fighting each other. This gap, this interruption in Gumball's awareness while someone else is using his body is a recurring thing in the next couple of instances, and to me can be considered a form of dissociation, a disconnection from or discontinuity in one's memories, thoughts, emotions, surroundings, body, or identity. This phenomenon, first and foremost, is heavily nuanced. It's very easy for people to incorrectly assume things about someone experiencing dissociation. Second, dissociation and plurality are not the same thing. Different definitions, different experiences, they're not always conflated. Plurality can be a form of dissociation, of course, but this is not the case for every collective. Third, dissociation doesn't have just one solid cause that applies to everyone. It heavily depends on someone's dispositions, not just experiences, and not just traumatic experiences either. In the case of the ghost, I personally consider this a plural wit dissociation case. That is, both dissociation and plurality are present, but the plurality isn't a form of dissociation. At most, Gumball experiences a disconnect from his surroundings, body, and memory, like at least emotional memory, at least. It can't be assumed that he also experiences a disconnect from his identity. Carrie being present in his body doesn't necessitate that Gumball's identity or selfhood are altered in any way. It's very easy to mistakenly assume, especially from the outside, that Gumball's sense of self is specifically the thing that's changing here just because his body is being used by another. Gumball has his identity, Carrie has hers, and the only things that are explicitly being changed around are control of Gumball's body and Gumball's connection to said body, as well as the environment that his body is in. Those things can still fall under dissociation, so with both dissociation and plurality actively existing, but not conflating, I'm regarding this instance as a plural wit dissociation case. The second instance lies in Season 2, Episode 5, The Flower, which shows a similar case of spiritual plurality with dissociation, but definitely a noticeable difference. This time, the spirit using Gumball's body isn't a classmate or friend, but instead a manifestation of his jealousy of Leslie for hanging out with Penny Fitzgerald, Gumball's love interest and later girlfriend. Much like with the ghost, Gumball's memory, connection to his body, and awareness of surroundings are interrupted while jealousy is fronting, except for some point in the episode at which they are co-fronting and Gumball retains those things. I will note that there seems to be a lot more co-fronting and communication between Gumball and jealousy in this episode than between Gumball and Carrie and the ghost, at least to me, and I have my thoughts on why this may be the case. 1. Gumball was arguably less naive and pushoverish than he was in Season 1, speaking up more about certain things and gradually getting his snark and cynical edge that we see full-fledged in Season 3 and onwards. This would mean that he has relatively less hesitation telling someone off who's in this body that's using it in ways that he doesn't approve of. 2. Gumball is friends with Carrie, while jealousy is just a bad acquaintance at least, and a bitter adversary at most. It's possible that it's easier for Gumball to actively oppose jealousy than Carrie simply because jealousy isn't a friend. 3. Since this is the second time Gumball's body is spiritually possessed, he'd probably have at least a little more experience with this situation, and can maintain his external awareness consistently enough to co-front at least periodically. Basically, he's probably able to keep himself from dissociating a little better than in the ghost. 4. Maybe Carrie's possessive ability is stronger than jealousy's in the sense that she can control a body and block off access to front longer, more consistently, or more effortlessly than jealousy can. It could be all of these to some extent, or it could be none of these and something else entirely. Feel free to let me know your thoughts about this in the comments. One more thing to add before leaving this episode: jealousy counts as an emotive, or an emotive, I think it's an emotive, a headmate formed from an emotion. Even though jealousy, like the spirit, is spiritual in nature, it's manifested or formed from the emotion of the same name. A spiritual emotive is still an emotive. The third instance lies in Season 3, Episode 7, The Name, which portrays psychological plurality and could either be considered a plural with dissociation case or a plural as dissociation case. Upon learning that his legal name is Zach, Gumball's internal and external factors undergo a hefty change as Zach's presence increases. Unlike the other two instances, Gumball does experience a disconnection in his identity portrayed by gradually fading and eventually not remembering his name at a certain point in the episode. He's dissociated from himself while Zach's selfhood stabilizes more and more. The reason why this instance can be considered either of the two cases boils down to interpretation. The name gives a lot more to work with because, unlike the ghost and the flower, this episode grants a look into Gumball's headspace and explicitly shows certain things about Gumball that we can speculate about, such as his gradual fading. That means instead of assumptions, there are inferences that we can make instead. We get to see Gumball and Zach interact in headspace as well, which may have been why there wasn't any communication between them being shown from the outside. On one hand, Gumball's intense dissociation in this episode could be the result of becoming aware of Zach too early, which would mean the plurality aspect isn't a form of dissociation per se, but instead causing it, similar to the spiritual plurality instances and rendering it a plural with dissociation case. On the other hand, the knowledge of his legal name could have caused Gumball to dissociate so much from himself that the formed dissociative state took on the identity of the legal name and gained other mental elements, such as personality, traits, and values, that may have been Gumball's originally. This can be considered identity confusion of at least some kind, and would render it a plural as dissociation case. What's interesting about the plural as dissociation case to me is that in the later half of the episode, Gumball loses his identity in the sense of, who am I? But he still has his selfhood because he has a sense of I in the first place. Personally, I theorize that in the plural as dissociation case, this could have been similar to how Zack started out as Gumball's dissociation began in the earlier half of the episode. If this is the case, though, we saw this from the outside with Gumball repeatedly uttering Zack and Darwin joining in. It's basically the reverse of Gumball's gradual fade-out within his and Zack's mindscape. Zack was gradually fading in as a sort of blank slate presence that was formed in the wake of Gumball's dissociation from his own identity, and grabbed a few of Gumball's more cockier traits in the process of stabilization. Note that this is specifically in the plural as dissociation case. In the plural with dissociation case, Zack and Gumball are both fully stabilized and solid in their selfhoods and identities, but Gumball isn't made aware of Zack until the name. It could even be said that Zack was a repressed presence. It's possible that Gumball was unconsciously repressing Zack by having low ambition and being content with just doing the bare minimum, essentially holding back his potential for being a winner, and this was explored in the season 2 episode The Fridge. I'd expect all of that blockage, combined with Gumball's dispositions, combined with past pressure to push his limits for the sake of great achievements, to result in some severe mental friction. That friction, in Gumball's case, happened to be dissociative. And that about does it for the world of Gumball's plural rep. With the ghost and the flower being plural with dissociation cases, and the name being either a plural with dissociation case or a plural as dissociation case, Gumball seems to have an inclination for both plurality and dissociation. That is, his natural mental framework makes him prone to those things. Even in the beginning of the flower, for instance, there's such a gap in synchronization between his external surroundings and his subjective perception that his perception is the complete opposite of shared reality. And Darwin definitely doesn't hesitate to make him aware of this. In the season 3 episode The Downer, Gumball's sour mood causes him to disconnect from his environment for most of the day. There are plenty of other instances of Gumball's dissociative tendencies, and in some cases, such as The Downer, whether they count as dissociative or psychotic, or both, is up to interpretation. I'm someone who regards definitions very, literally. For instance, if a disconnect from one's surroundings count as a form of dissociation, and a loss of contact with external reality counts as under psychosis, someone whose perception is disconnected from their outer world environment would be having both a dissociative and psychotic moment, at least going by both definitions explicitly and technically. Now, practically, like in the case of a psychologist or a psychiatrist determining what to label someone's experience, they'd likely do it very, very differently. For a lot of people, it may just seem counterintuitive to consider anything at all, both dissociative and psychotic. It doesn't help that both things already have an extreme stigma and negative connotation attached to them, to the point where it seems kind of taboo to even mention them without either being super scared or super patronizing. Anyway, with that quick rant out of the way, be on the lookout for The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball premiering on the 28th for Hulu in the US and later on in the year for Cartoon Network and HBO Max internationally. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your time.